Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome in to another new episode of The Lager Line, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. The team now at the All-Star break of the 2023 season. It's been active the last couple of days with Jabari Smith Jr. in the Skills Challenge and Rising Stars. Joined in that Rising Stars by Alperen Şengün and Tari Eason would have been Jalen Green if not for the groin injury he suffered in the final game before the break, that bad loss in Oklahoma City. And of course, it was capped off by KJ Martin in the dunk contest on Saturday night. Thought he was a lot better than Jalen was in the dunk contest a year ago. Not quite enough to win, but definitely acquitted himself very, very well on the national stage. Paolo, you enjoying All-Star Weekend?
There's two ways I can go about the answer. I can be a nice guy, and I can be, I can appease the happy side of Rockets fandom and say that I'm just not a very happy panda or something. I think that's the saying. Or I can be honest with myself and say, to quote the great, not too late but wait, John Wall, this shit's ass terrible. No, listen, it's just there's not many bright angles to approach this from, and I'm not going to linger too much on the All-Star weekend just because we're a young team, and the first 2 days are basically built for the fans of young teams to enjoy. But it's just so bad. Like the Rising Stars game, Jalen's clearly our player that has the most profile for that kind of event. He did well last season. Şengün just wasn't having it. Jabari just missed his shots. Darison didn't even play. And then the second day, it kind of went not as poorly as it could have been because the rookies team on the skills challenge did win. Didn't win the skills challenge, but won one of the rounds. Mm-hmm. But even within that, the relay event, Jabari was easily the worst out of them because Ivy was at least quick, even though he bricked his shots. Paolo at least made a 3. Jabari just missed all of his threes, and then you move on to the passing stuff. And Jabari had 20 points. He was the bottom of basically the entire event on the passing event, and then the shooting, which is supposed to be Jabari's specialty, his team made 2 points, and they came from a little floater from Paolo. Like they were about to just have a flat tire and just have 0 points. And then just so as if it couldn't get any worse, as a reflection of the Rocket season in itself, KJ Martin got screwed by the refs again.
There you go.
There's no way you can argue to me that Jericho Sims have better dunks than KJ terrible. Martin. It's not even close. The dude even pulled himself up by the net on his latest dunk, and he was still 47. I don't know.
Although I will say because of Mac, it wasn't like KJ was going to win regardless. But yeah, it would have been nice to see him get a couple more dunks in the final.
Yeah, they weren't going to win. He wasn't going to win. Mac McClung had that in his bag, but and fairly so. I mean, he did stuff that was better than the last dunk contest altogether, but still, man, we're Rockets fans. We're literally we're 13 and we only have 13 wins. I don't even remember
13 and 45.
I don't even remember I don't even remember the 45 because it's too depressing, depending on how you look at it. But can we have anything nice? Not even in the All-Star game, not even in the All-Star weekend, we can have something go our way. Come on, dude, it's ridiculous. Whatever.
That's Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. We're talking about the Rockets at All-Star Weekend. And I will say, at least Jabari missing shots this time can't somehow be pinned on Kevin Porter Jr. or Jalen Green. He missed them this time of his own volition, right?
Yeah, man. That was one of the most aggravating discussions on Twitter. And yeah. Just to move on to that, as a talking point, this is basically the unofficial halfway halfway point of the season. There was a big debate on Twitter because Salas had that quote after our last podcast about I
Not
don't
running
run
a
any
play.
plays. Yeah, and then people took that and went off with it. And I think, as usual, the truth is somewhere in between. There's people who are really outraged that Jabari isn't getting plays run up for him, even though it's been obvious since the beginning of the season. There's people who are outraged that people are mad at Silas for not running plays for him because he isn't making his shots. And I think the truth has to be somewhere in between, at least in my opinion. I think yes, the guards don't do Jabari any favors, and the fact that we have no true point guard doesn't do him any favors. The fact that Silas doesn't draw up plays for him doesn't do him any favors. Not any favors because it could be detrimental if he's not ready to have plays ran for him, but it doesn't help him either.
Mhm.
And I don't think the coach coming out in public and acknowledging it, while not a big blunder, I also don't think it's a nice thing to come out onto the public and say, "Hey, I'm not running any plays for my number 3 pick." Like it's just kind of a weird thing to bring out onto the public.
Mhm.
But personally, at some point, right, Jabari has to be making at least his catch and
Right.
shoot shots. Sam Vecini brought up on Twitter like 3 days ago. He said Jabari is making 30.8% of his unguarded catch and shoot threes.
That's
We
137th out of 140 players with at least 75 of those attempts.
yeah,
That's
it's
really
basically
bad.
yeah,
And
it's
if you're
basically
watching
worse in
these
the league.
games, a lot of them are wide open. So this narrative that he's just not getting fed by KPJ or Jalen the right ways, and that he turned into something close to the elite shooter we all expected him to be if he was out there with Chris Paul, I just find that downright comical. Some of this is just on him, and my guess is that if you ask him, he would own up to it himself that he thinks he should be making many of these shots. And while I'm right there with you, you can't say that subpar guard play from the standpoint of facilitating has no impact. Clearly, having a legit point guard would help this team in a number of ways. To sort of give him a pass for missing so many wide open shots, and say what you will about the Rockets, they're bad, but they do have creators, and especially the starting lineup. When you look at KPJ when he plays, Jalen, Alperen Şengün, for most of the season, Eric Gordon, there are guys that can collapse defenses and kick it out. And Jabari's had wide open looks. He just hasn't made them. To me, it's that simple. And we are going to be talking about the other interviews. I want to stress that it's been eventful as far as the All-Star break. Hashtag pray for Victor. We are going to get to that with Tilman Fertitta. We're going to talk about the interview that Rafael Stone did with the Houston Chronicle and Brian T. Smith. Some revealing stuff there as we look ahead to the second half of the season and what the Rockets try to do as this year winds down. And of course, entering a very pivotal 2023 offseason with the aforementioned draft. Hashtag pray for Victor, as well as the free agency period where they have up to $60 million in cap space. We'll talk about that. But let's start with Jabari, because I think that interview, which dropped Wednesday when he was in Oklahoma City, and in fairness to Jabari, let's note that the game that night against the Thunder, I know the Rockets got blown out. He actually played really well. 15 points, 9 boards, 2 blocks. He made 4 of 8 shots, 2 of 4 from 3. He got to the free throw line. It was one of Jabari's best games in a while. So hopefully he can build on that. But I think just some of the narrative that the Rockets have failed him, that's overdone. He's getting opportunities. Thankfully, his last game, he did make some of them. But if there's one thing to look out for as far as the theme, the second half of this season, well, it's not really the second half because, again, there's only 24 games left. We just call it the second half because of the All-Star break. But if he doesn't have a Jalen Green-esque run, that might be a bit much to ask in terms of what Jalen did after the All-Star break a year ago. At least take a step forward to where you feel better about him going into the offseason than you do right now. I think that, above everything else, is a fair goal for the remaining 24 games that get started on Friday, right?
Yeah, I think you can't really expect him to have the lead that Jalen had, especially because Jalen is a scorer, and so it's easier for him to pop off when the focus is on him. There's a few things there's a few bullet points that I wanted to go over about the entire Jabari debate about why is he struggling. I think there's been some stuff that's gone wrong that hasn't made it easier on him. I think it's fair to say that earlier in the season, while they were trying to figure out the Bruno Şengün, Şengün was banged up for a little bit. Bruno was hurt for a little bit. The fact that Jabari had to play center for stretches, which is something he's not used to,
Mhm.
on a team that's trying to figure out defensively what they want to do. They were playing drop with him, who is clearly a switch defender. The fact that the five is just a more physical position that could have thrown him off his rhythm to begin the season. I think that didn't help didn't help him shoot any better. And I will say that having some plays run for him, like just letting him bring the ball up the court, which is not a play run for him, but if you let him bring the ball up, I don't know, 10% of the time, there's going to be situations where the defense is not going to respect this pull-up jumper, and that's one of his strongest moves thus far. So you could make it more of a point to get him the ball. But then again, he's not a shot creator. And he came into the
Right.
league as a guy that was supposed to play 1 through 5 switch defense and be a sharpshooter. And that's what he is now. And we can hope that he'll develop, or that's what he was supposed to be now. And we could hope that he develop into something more in the future. Turns out he's not even that now, but regardless, it's hard to just give a guy like that heavy touches when you already have on your team JPJ, Şengün, and Jalen Green, who are shot creators. Their archetypes fit that way. So while I do agree that they could have made him made him have or gave him a more prominent role in the offense. It wasn't as easy to do, and there's an argument to be made that if you give a guy that's not ready for those
Right.
reps and force him into it, it could tank his confidence even further.
Yes.
And we know with the power of hindsight that his confidence is in the gutter because it hasn't gone well. But I'm not sure giving him more plays run for him in volume would fix that. And then the other thing that I would say is a lot of the things that this team does when it comes to offense comes from just what's the path of least resistance. For example, people bring Jackson actually on Twitter brought up Jackson Gatlin, a host of LOR. He brought up that we see KPJ and Jalen take mid-range shots all the time. Why can't we set those plays up for Jabari out of the post? And I think the explanation is exactly what I just said. The offense is very much a lot of the time just the path of least resistance, and KPJ and Jalen can get those spots and shoot those shots by themselves because they're ball handlers. Jabari Smith needs a play set up for him to catch the ball in the post up to get that shot up. And our offense just isn't organized enough for that to work. We see how tough it is sometimes, how long Şengün goes without a post touch sometimes, even when he's on fire. It's an indictment on the coaching staff. It's an indictment on the players, but it naturally doesn't lend itself to giving Jabari more touches. And to me, the most important part, which I think is the biggest reason why he's struggling, is he is a rhythm shooter. And at Auburn, he didn't have a better point guard or a better shooting guard than Jalen Green and KPJ.
Yeah, those guys were bad.
Yeah, they were terrible, and he still shot well.
Right.
Which makes me think that the reason he's shooting poorly is it is a rhythm thing, but it's not necessarily about the volume. It's about the consistency and how our offense, because it also often goes through the path of least resistance. We will see huge stretches when any player, this being Jalen Green or Alperen Şengün or now Jabari Smith, will be having a great game and don't get the ball for a long stretch of time. I think that's what really hurts rhythm per se. It's the fact that there's games where Jabari Smith will take 2 threes in the first quarter and not touch the ball until the fourth. There's games where Jalen Green will be dropping 20 at the half and then not see the ball until basically the end of the game when the team's already getting blown out and it's time to sit him for to clear the bench. It's the same thing with Alperen Şengün when he's been really good when he's gotten the touches earlier in the season when KPJ got hurt. And now KPJ is still hurt, but we're not seeing Şengün ball anymore because it's just what this team does. There's no structure. It's very much what happens to happen on any given night, and a lot of it is unintentional. To me, that's what hurts rhythm, and not only for Jabari, but Jabari included, also for Jalen Green, also for Alperen Şengün, also for Kevin Porter Jr. And some players are better at dealing with that adversity than others. I think Alperen Şengün deals with that adversity fairly well. I don't know if it is because he came from a pro league already where he's not clearly the best player probably before he came to the NBA, and so he's more used to not touching the ball for long stretches of time and then getting it, and okay, this is my chance. Let me go get something done. Maybe that's why, but I think that's the biggest reason why Jabari Smith has struggled so much when it comes to rhythm and making his shots. That plus, confidence, and it's a tough transition for the from college to the NBA.
Yeah.
The bright side, just really quick, the bright side is, well, the defense is still there, the size is still there. He hasn't gotten hurt and lost mobility. All he needs, and he has made, to be fair to him, he's made strides attacking closeouts and finishing inside, to be fair. The bright side is, hey, he only needs to learn how to shoot to be a useful NBA player. He's close, right? He already has a lot of what he needs to be, a really useful NBA player. He might not be a star, but it's not far off. Jabari Smith comes back next season with a 37% jump shot, which I would say is on the lower end of his projections coming out of the draft. And he's all of a sudden a very useful player in whatever type of team you're trying to build. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's been a tough season, but it doesn't take much for it to switch on and him, looking like the draft pick that most people expect him to be.
Yeah, and as we're recording this All-Star Game Sunday, he's shooting basically 39% from the field this season, a little over 30% from three. Not what you would expect with his pre-draft profile, but in fairness to Jabari, he is one of the youngest prospects in his entire class, still just 19 years old. He physically has the tools. The length allows him to shoot over pretty much everybody. So even if he's not the best athlete in terms of his leaping ability and able to create separation in that way, just his overall length and height, the advantages he has from that standpoint allow him to sort of Kevin Durant like just shoot over people in a lot of instances. And as he gets his legs under him and gets used to the rigors of an 82 game season, hopefully down the stretch of this year and especially future seasons, he's able to adjust to the NBA life. Because one argument in favor of Jabari that I saw Nathan Fogg put out there, he's actually 37% on threes from the corners. And the corners, of course, are the shortest shots, which are closest to college and high school basketball. So that could suggest that a lot of what's going on are these longer threes in terms of his struggles above the break from the top of the key. Those are, we're talking 3-4 feet further a lot of the time relative to the threes he took and all the data he compiled in high school and college. And so that can take some time. And so the fact that he's much more respectable from the corners suggests that, yeah, it could be just an overall adjustment to the longer line. And hopefully as this season goes on, and especially as we get into the summer and next year, he's able to sort of make the adjustments with his legs, with his mechanics, and account for that additional distance. As far as the element of calling plays for him, again, I don't want to act like that we're sympathizers to Stephen Silas. We've been critical of him a lot in the past. This has not been a particularly well-coached team. With that said, this is a situation where I do think a lot of it's over the top because you said it. Confidence is a two-way street. You can easily make it worse. People say, well, you run plays for him, you can build his confidence. Okay, you can actually make it even worse. And I saw someone respond to you. They even ran plays for Garrison Matthews. Technically, that's true, but also think of who Garrison Matthews was playing with. The few plays, and it was very few, that Garrison Matthews had run with them, it was those lineups typically with Dacian Nix, Usman Garuba that had basically no creators on that second unit. As opposed to Jabari, when he's playing with the starters, for the majority of this year, he's played alongside KPJ, Jalen, Eric Gordon, and Alperen Şengün. He's clearly the worst of the five when it comes to creating his own offense. So you are taking away reps if you were to run more directly for Jabari Smith Jr. as opposed to just asking him to hit open shots. You would be taking reps away from players who are better at creating than he is. And 3 of those 4 are also your young prospects. They're all 22 years old or younger in the case of KPJ, Jalen, and Şengün. Perhaps it's an opportunity early next weekend when I think coming out of the All-Star break, certainly Friday in Golden State and maybe Sunday in Portland as well. If KPJ returns, I think after missing 6 weeks, it's not like you're going to throw him back in and he's going to play 35 minutes. He'd probably be limited after all the time he's missed with the toe issue to probably 20 minutes or so per game. Jalen Green, I know they got an MRI that apparently left them relieved, and they don't think it's going to be as bad as when he missed a month with a hamstring a year ago. I wouldn't expect him to play right out of the break. At a bare minimum, if you have a soft tissue injury in the NBA, it's at least 2 weeks, unless you have a reason to really expedite the timetable, i.e. you're trying to get a playoff spot or you're playing for a title. And obviously that's not the case with the Rockets owning the worst record in the league. So they're going to be cautious. So I think no Jalen out of the break. My guess is no KPJ either, but if he does return, a very limited role. So with that, you are going to have a lot fewer creators. And so perhaps, clearly Şengün is going to be option one, but this is an option to get more for Jabari in terms of creating opportunities, because who else is going to do it? But I think that's something you have to keep in mind when we look at the context of the season to date. Who are you going to take those creating reps from in the units that Jabari is primarily playing with? That's, to me, a big difference from comparing Jabari to someone like Garrison Matthews, who's playing with the second unit. In terms of who Jabari is with, that sort of limits, in my opinion, what your options are. And so Stephen Silas is in a tough spot. If they give those reps to Jabari and he doesn't do well, then guess what? His confidence is probably going to get worse, and people are going to be upset because then you're taking away reps from guys who are better as creators than Jabari is. It's sort of a no-win situation. And so there's absolutely plenty of things that Stephen has responsibility for that he's failed at, or at least has not succeeded to this point at. But I don't think that the usage of Jabari Smith is a big one of those. I also think it's interesting. A lot of people say, get him a shot or two so that he can get going. It comes back to this concept of building confidence, as you said. I'm actually not sure what his go-to shot is. Some people said get him a shot, coming around a screen. I actually don't think that's it. When you watch Jabari, I think that's the element of his game that's going to take a lot more time because he's a bit stiff in his movements. It's not like he comes around screens and is just immediately ready to rise and fire. What I've noticed with Jabari, he has gotten a few of these opportunities when he gets comfortable, and we saw him in December and early January. It really looked for about 6 weeks like he was right on the verge, if he just had a couple more shots fall, of breaking out, and then it eventually went the other way. It actually, to me, feels like the pull-up, where you just let him bring the ball up the court, and he already has his body square to the bucket, and just basically pull up from the top of the key. That's what he seems to really, really like. He just hasn't made enough of those shots because, again, I think some of that goes back to the longer three-point line. But some of these ideas, I feel like people are thinking more theoretically than they are in reality. Because, yeah, in a perfect world, you have a shooter like Jabari Smith Jr., you would think he is based on his college profile. And yeah, a lot of these guys, you want to send them around a maze of screens and get them the ball in rhythm. But if you actually watch him, to me, that doesn't seem to be his comfort zone. I suppose you can argue get him some touches at the elbow. We saw him have that one game in Dallas where he was lights out for a couple of quarters doing that. But it almost seems like, to me, the pull-up. And again, that's something that if you do want to do that, it's sort of like, well, is he hot? And if he is, well, ride him or give him the opportunity. And they have done that. It's not like in that situation, you're running a play for him necessarily, and you're asking Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, or whoever the initiator of the offense is to get him the ball in a certain spot. I hope he gets there. I think, as his game progresses the next few years and he gets more comfortable with the physicality of the NBA and the angles and competing against guys with greater length to defend his shots than he was used to in college, then perhaps he can get into that role to where those types of plays make sense. But right now, I just don't think that even necessarily makes sense with his shot profile and what he seems to be comfortable with. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it definitely does. He wasn't supposed to be a movement shooter. He was even
Right.
at Auburn. He was more of a pull up. Like if he had to create his own shot, it was either a pull up or just out of the post. Which I mean, I'm not gonna get back into into draft discussion from last year, but hey, man, I see a lot of people say, "Oh, you've got to get plays drawn up for your top 3 pick or your number 3 pick," and I'm like, not all the top 3 picks are the same. Wasn't I mean, Jabari Smith's archetype is not one of someone who's going to be a shot creator, and we've said this ad nauseum in this podcast. If you were Jalen Green or if you were Paulo Banchero, I would kind of see it. But I'm trying to find an example of this. Right. For example, Jaren Jackson Jr. was a top 4 pick, and I think most people would consider him to be a hit for the Memphis Grizzlies. He's their second most important player. they weren't drawing up plays for Jaren Jackson Jr. And he's way better of an offensive player than Jabari Smith is when it comes to getting his own shot. But he's still not a shot creator. And so it's not that you're just because you're a top 3 pick, you're supposed to be this offensive option. No, if you are good enough to be a top 3 pick because of your defense and your off ball ability and your complementary ability, that's what the team should be leaning into. To me, rather than running plays for him, I think it would be interesting to see him, be point of attack sometimes, just by default. Like we stuck Eric Gordon on a lot of the other team's best players throughout the entire year. I think it would be more important to have Jabari Smith guard Luka Doncic. To have Jabari Smith guard a lot of these guys. He's guarded Giannis, for example, and it hasn't gone too well. Depends on the game. He had one really good game against Giannis. But to me, that's more of what they should be doing rather than let's have Jabari curl off a lot of screens or let's have him ISO somewhere.
There's also one element of the report that I want to touch on before we transition to other topics. I saw some discussion on social media regarding the comments from his dad, and I'm going to read that quote. He spent the first half of his rookie season trying to live up to this number 3 pick when you're the 5th, 6th option on the team. So that ain't been too fun. And people tried to turn that into an issue of, is his father questioning the coaching staff? Is this a problem? In my opinion, the answer is clearly no. Think back to KJ Martin in the offseason. We had all these quotes from his dad on talk radio shows questioning the culture in Houston, if it was the best place for his son, if he was developing. And a lot of people in the offseason, it felt like, at least on Rockets Twitter, had convinced themselves that KJ needed to go because he just wasn't bought in. And what happened when the games actually started? KJ's been one of the most dialed in guys all season long. He's been great in the locker room. He's done his job. He's taken on an increased role. And now with Eric Gordon gone, KJ's your starting small forward the rest of the way and is playing very, very well. And he has not been a distraction at all. And the reason I think it's important to note, honestly, the comments from KJ's dad and now Jabari's dad in this Anscape article from Mark Spears that we've been referencing, the only thing that's different is because those guys are former players. They have a megaphone in that media people, talk shows are going to quote these guys because they have names that resonate. They have played in the league. It's honestly not that different than what every NBA player hears from their inner circle, be it family, friends. Everybody in the league is surrounded by a camp that thinks that they could be even better if only the coach was using them in the right way, or if the GM would get players that would fit better with them. They are told this all the time because, of course, in many cases, these guys are the meal ticket for their families and for their overall networks. And these people want to believe that they could be to that next level, which of course has, in many cases, significant financial ramifications if the team would prioritize them better and give them what they need to succeed. The thing is, every player hears that. So, Jabari hears that, but so does everybody else in the Rockets locker room. And you just sort of have to check it at the door when you go in because as a player, okay, I'm hearing this, but everybody else has friends and family telling them the same thing. And so we just sort of have to accept that that's what's going on behind the scenes. And then we try to make it work as best we can. So I don't see it as a problem. I know those quotes sort of raised some eyebrows on Rockets Twitter, at least on my timeline. I honestly don't think it's that different than any other player that's on the Rockets or other teams, especially when they're young. Everybody thinks that, they would be taking the next step if only they were in a slightly better situation, if something could just get tweaked a little bit. That's just what people close to you say. They have your back. They want to believe in you. And the only thing that's different in the case of a guy like Jabari or KJ is that because they're former NBA players, in the case of their fathers, they have a bigger megaphone. They're more likely to have their quotes end up transcribed on ESPN or on a popular talk radio show, something like that. So when you consider the context, I don't think it's a big deal. To me, Jabari has always had a good mindset. Say what you will about him, but he's always owned up to his mistakes. He's talked about wanting to get better. I don't see any reason to be super alarmed by the comments from his dad in that article. I think he's got a good attitude. It just comes down to eventually he's going to make shots. It's that simple, and everything else is just noise.
Yeah, and a perfect example of what you just said. If you follow Tari Eason's mom on Twitter, she's one of the funniest, one of the best Twitter accounts. She'll go out and tweet out publicly and say, or not complain, but mention that, oh, I wish Tari was playing to close this game because he's a good defender and we ended up giving up a lead, or he was playing well before. Like these are the players' families. Is your family not supporting you in the same way? I mean, the only difference is that Tari's mom isn't a former NBA player, like Ben said, and so she's not going to get the same amount of coverage. And she doesn't mean it in a bad way at all. Sometimes, most of the time, she's right. Tari should be playing more, but you don't see national media going off on what Tari's mom is saying because, well, it's even more publicly available than what Jabari's dad said. But it's just how the cookie crumbles. I'm not overreacting to that either. I think it's part of why you need some vets on the team. Listening to Danny Green's podcast was pretty eye-opening on his approach, on his objectivity. He was traded and he was like analyzing, oh, I got traded for this guy, and what am I better at than this guy? What am I worse at? What could the team be thinking? That made them make the decision. And sometimes guys who have been in the league for a long time, they know, hey, sometimes you just gotta accept the reality that, and this is not, I'm not saying Jabari should accept this reality at all. I'm just saying sometimes sometimes guys who have been in the league for a long time accept the reality that, hey, I'm a better basketball player, even at creating my own shot, than 99.9% of humans on Earth. Still, as long as there's 3 other guys on my team that are better than me, I'm not going to be an offensive option, and I'm going to have to play a role because the air is really rarefied, and you can be a great basketball player. I have no doubts that Jabari Smith would beat, like he said, he would beat Michael Jordan on a one-on-one right now, even though he's not a shot creator, and Michael Jordan was. I have no doubt that he would.
He could beat a 60-year-old man.
But it doesn't mean that he's better at it than Jalen Green, KPJ, or Şengün, or projects to be better than them. And next season, if James Harden comes in, or Scoot Henderson comes in, or Victor Wembanyama comes in, or even some other guys come in, he's probably not going to project to be better than them at shot creating. Doesn't mean that he's not going to be a more valuable player. It's not the same thing. It's just being the 5th option doesn't really matter. Jaren Jackson Jr. is not the number 1 or the number 2 option on the Memphis Grizzlies, and he's still the 2nd most important player on the team. It's I think some of it also comes from guys having vets, and I think KJ Martin's a perfect, actually, just to continue my rant for 30 seconds longer. I think KJ Martin actually benefited a lot from the fact that his dad he was a vet in this league and he knows the business, and you can tell that KJ has very good instincts and from very early on adapted to playing off the ball. And I have no doubt in my mind that his dad told him, hey, listen, the way you stick in this league is by playing defense, cutting without the ball, and shooting threes. And KJ Martin's game is basically built in a lab for an off-ball player. If KJ Martin had spent the last 3 or 4 years of his development trying to be a shot creator, he likely wouldn't have stuck in the league. But right now, he's primed for a big or a medium-sized extension that's going to give him, generational wealth, most likely. Why? Because he's really good at, things that fit around players that are better than him, players that need the ball in their hands.
And I guess the silver lining in the case of Jabari is that, at least for a couple of games, for better or for worse, he is going to get an opportunity to be more featured and to create, because coming out of the All-Star break, I just don't think the Rockets have much of a choice. Clearly, Şengün is going to be option 1, but my guess is no KPJ and no Jalen Green. Maybe you have one of those guys, but very, very limited. And of course, there's no Eric Gordon because you just traded him. So in my opinion, other than Şengün, who's going to be, of course, your top option and get heavy usage, there's going to be a lot of possessions where Jabari Smith is probably your best option just because at 6'11", him rising and firing over someone is probably the best shot you can get, because I just don't know where else you go to create. I guess Josh Christopher is someone that you could scale up a little bit in terms of
Res-
usage, but
Respect Ty Washington's floater, please.
okay.
I'm joking.
But you know what I mean? It's not like all of a sudden Tari Eason or Usman Garuba are going to be guys that you're going to say, okay, go out and get me a bucket. They are what they are. So obviously Şengün's going to be option one, but after that, with the injuries, at least in the short term, you may not have much of a choice but to sort of give Jabari a green light whenever. And so maybe he'll respond to that well. Maybe he doesn't, but regardless, he's going to get the opportunity. And so that's the interesting thing about this debate, is that it's sort of resolved itself, at least in the short term, because I think at least for the next few games, you're not going to have much choice but to get him more involved. Anyway, let's transition to the more macro things. We've been talking micro because, well, we haven't done that enough of late. We've had the trade deadline themed episodes leading up to that. And then, of course, we recapped what happened with Eric Gordon, Garrison Matthews, Bruno Fernando going out largely for draft compensation. In terms of the macro, this season is clearly about maximizing draft capital. Call it tanking if you want. You can also talk about developing young players and prioritizing, but we know, and Rafael Stone spelled it out in his interview with the Houston Chronicle that we referenced earlier, these are the only 2 years, 2022 and 2023, that the Rockets fully control their own draft capital. So in terms of just asset management, it's important to maximize the value, because going forward, it's all going to be about Brooklyn. Starting in 2024, unless you're really, really bad to the point where the top four protection could come into play. And again, even if that's the case, it's basically a 50-50 coin flip. Hopefully it doesn't, because you are going to spend in the offseason on veterans. Rafael Stone spelled that out in his interview. This is the last opportunity. And so the Rockets, again, have the league's worst record. And I guess before we even go into the interviews, one thing that I do like, when we look at the standings, with Charlotte winning their last couple of games before the break, they are now at 17 wins. The Rockets are at 13. That's a pretty big gap. And when you're talking about teams in the lottery and, maximizing your odds, the wins are the column that I focus on the most, because, of course, the wins are very few and far between for these teams. So it's very difficult to sort of stack wins and catch up. So the fact that Charlotte has 4 more wins than Houston now, that's the separation that Houston would have to make up over these final 24 games to not be in the 3 worst teams. And that being in the 3 worst teams means that you have maximum odds of, getting Wemby or Scoot, getting pick 1, getting pick 2. Now, there are some benefits to being the worst rather than the second or third worst, in that, if you're the worst, you can only fall to pick 5. And then, if you're second, you could theoretically fall to 6, third theoretically fall to 7, because they draw for the top 4 picks. But in the end, the big prize is Wemby or Scoot, and maximizing your odds, even if it's just an incremental bumping you from 24% to 27%. When we're talking about franchise-changing talents like those guys, anything is worthwhile. And so 4 games of separation, not going to say it's done, but I think you have to be feeling really, really good if you're the Rockets, that certainly, some wins can drop you below San Antonio or Detroit, that might slightly lower your floor. But in terms of having max odds, which is what you get from being in the 3 worst teams, I feel pretty good about the Tankathon standings now, because I just have a really tough time seeing the Rockets make up 4 games over the final 24. So at least from a standings perspective, I think the Rockets have already done what they needed to do in terms of maximizing their odds, right?
Yeah, I mean, and to compile onto that, we now don't have Garrison Matthews to take on a 7-game winning streak, so we're even safer now. I think I'm with you on a couple of games back. I think it was a game between Charlotte and San Antonio, or Charlotte and another tanking team. I think it was San Antonio. No, sorry, correctly. It was Charlotte and the Atlanta Hawks, and I was having a debate on Twitter about who would we want to win, because Atlanta winning gets them closer to the Clippers, and Charlotte winning gives us an extra 1-win buffer on the race for Wemby, or whatever you want to call it. And Itamar specifically, he said that he'd rather have Atlanta win because he doesn't think the Rockets will catch up the 3 games that it was back then. Now it's 4 to Charlotte. And I think at 4 is the point where I'm comfortable. I think we could, win 3 more games than Charlotte from now until the end of the season. At 4, I just think it becomes even more doubtful. So because of that, I'm comfortable with that. Still, and sometimes the 4 scenario is important, right? But sometimes, and myself included as fans, we overvalue that a little bit just because we've got to have something to root for, right? So we might as well root for the
Right.
small benefit of having a floor of the 5th pick. Not to say that it doesn't matter, because it does. I think personally, I know we haven't done much draft talk. We'll get into it as we get closer to the draft, but I see 1 and 2, and then from 3 to 7, I don't see much of a difference. But I
Same.
do think that there will be teams that do see that difference. In specific, a team like the Orlando Magic, who has Wendell Carter Jr., Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Kellen Suggs, or Markel Fultz, or whoever you want to slot in there. They're clearly going to go for a guard or a backcourt player. And so from that perspective, they might value, they might value someone they might want to make sure that they get their guy, because there's a lot of positional versatility in between 3 and 7. You've got small
Mhm.
forwards, you've got power forwards, you've got guards, you've got point guards in specific, you've got shooting guards. There's a little bit of variation there. There are different archetypes. And I think a lot of the teams that are going to be picking at the top are going to have very specific needs going into the draft. Detroit already has Kate Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, for example. Besides Scoot, I don't think Amen Thompson would move them off that backcourt, for example. And so them landing 3 and taking Amen and like Amen Thompson might be the clear cut guy at 3 by the time we get to the draft, but they're not going to be as high on him. And they're probably going to want a small forward type. They just traded Sadiq Bey, for example. So they might want to go for someone who can play the 3. A lot of these teams, Houston, Detroit, even Indiana to some extent, and Orlando, and Charlotte, kind of iffy because their team's just weird. I think they have a point guard, and then besides the point guard, I think they can take whatever, anything. I think they are at stages in their rebuild where they have top picks or guys
Mhm.
that are playing like top picks, filling in a lot of the spots in the starting lineup. And you don't want to draft a guy in the top 5 that's going to go to the bench. So I think there's value to having the highest pick, because I think a lot of teams will be targeting specific guys rather than just going best player available, because while you will say that you always go for best player available, when you already have players on your team that are better than what the best player available is, that play the same position and aren't versatile enough to switch positions, then it stops making sense to go best player available, and that's when you start looking towards fit a little bit. That's what the Atlanta Hawks did, for example.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think there will be definite value in not going past 5, and so just from that perspective, I'll still be actively rooting for us. I don't think it will be hard because we have a lot of guys injured.
Right.
But yeah, I'm still valuing having the worst record in the league. Also because as a fan, if we get the worst record in the league for the 3rd time and we still don't get the number 1 pick, it will be more fuel for us to complain about and feel done wrong on.
Although
Although, just one
what
last
I
thing. Although I will say Wemby is like, I'm just 100% resigned that Wemby is going to San Antonio. It just makes too much sense.
what I will say as far as the number 1 scenario, ever since Tillman gave that interview on Saturday night, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, just search hashtag pray for Victor on Twitter and you'll find it. It's hilarious. Tillman at Mardi Gras in Galveston may have had a few beverages, and he's asked briefly on NBC's Houston affiliate. He's giving an interview and he mentions the Rockets. The interviewer does, and Tillman says, "Thank God we've got 10 days off," referring to the All-Star break, and then pray for Victor, which is absolutely hilarious. I mean, I personally like it because it shows, of course, the owner's frustrated too. The owner needs this mental break from watching the team losing the same way that we do. You
But
want an
he's being
owner.
patient, though. That's good. He's being
Yeah.
patient.
Yeah, he is. But the point is, you want the owner to actually care. Yeah, you don't want him to care so much that, like, or I guess you do want him to care, but you want him to be able to control it, which he has, without just pushing forward the timeline because he just can't take it. But you don't want it to be where he just checks out and doesn't care, because that level of passion in many cases may tip the scales when you're looking at a move or an investment that might move the needle for you in the future. You want him to care, and clearly he does. That's why he's frustrated. That's why he wants a big name like Victor Wembanyama to help turn this around. I was surprised that so many people, I hope it's joking, think that the NBA could punish the Rockets by not giving them the top pick now. Look, you could make a case back in the day when there were envelopes with teams' logos in them, when there wasn't much of a science to the draft lottery, that, back in the 80s when the Knicks got Patrick Ewing, there's these frozen envelope theories that basically David Stern knew who to draw when he put his hand in there. And the same was true. I believe they used to have ping pong balls with teams' logos on them. Right now, it's so sophisticated in terms of everybody's in the room when they draw the balls from the hopper, and it's not like they're drawing balls with teams' logos to where you can just, if you're trying to punish a team, take their logo out. No, what they're doing is drawing combinations of all these different balls, everything from 0 to 9, and every team has a certain amount of 4-digit combinations that mean that a pick is theirs, and they draw for 1, 2, 3, and 4. It would be really, really hard to fix that. I mean, the closest thing you get, I guess you could argue that some teams might be disproportionately represented in a certain number, like, say, the threes. But again, it's sort of equally distributed. It's not like all of a sudden just one franchise, the Rockets, is going to be in the threes. No, I mean, it would affect, you could shift the odds a little bit if you wanted, but it would be really, really hard. And if somehow that got out, this is the...
What's the upside? That's my question. The upside versus the downside, just a massive
right.
difference.
Yeah, and the downside, seriously, these prices for NBA franchises or any professional sports franchises right now, these are huge investments. And a guy like Wemby or Scoot, it is transformational in terms of the value of your franchise overnight. Guys like Tilman Fertitta or any other owner around the league, if they got even a hint of impropriety, that the league was, harming their value by actively scheming to keep players away from them, it would be the scandal of all scandals. Again, as you said, the harm is just not worth it. So I think and hope a lot of people are joking. The reality, maybe Tilman Fertitta gets a slight fine for, I don't think it'd be tampering, but, since Wemby hasn't officially declared, some people could view it as sort of nudging him in that direction. But if he does, it's not your money. So if you're on Rockets Twitter, don't worry about it. In terms of having any actual negative impact on the team, i.e., the league being upset at them, I can pretty much promise you, number one, it would be very difficult to fix the lottery. And number two, it's just not worth it, because that would be the scandal of all scandals. And you'd be talking about dramatically changing franchise valuations for people who, to them, investment is everything. They check these Forbes lists every year to see, it's not so much that they want to sell, but they certainly want to know the value of their asset. And of course, that has a lot to do with the financial terms they can get for a lot of their agreements with sponsors and across the board, because they want to tout the reach that their franchise has. It's just not worth it. So I think a lot of people are joking, but bottom line, there's no way that the NBA is going to actually try to keep Victor Wembanyama from the Rockets. If Victor Wembanyama has not become a Rocket, I think it's simply because of the odds. 86% of the simulations do not end up with the Rockets being at 1. It just is what it is with the flattened lottery odds.
Yeah, I will just say, you touched on a lot of the conspiracy theories. I agree. I said that when I say that I think he'll be a Spur, it's just, it's not actually a conspiracy theory. It just makes so much sense that the universe is gonna make it happen somehow, because they have basically a team built already that you can just plug in Victor Wembanyama. It makes all the sense in the world. They have a lot of 3-and-D wings. They have Trey Jones as a point guard. They have Popovich. They have, they are the prototypical team that never tanked, and so it would make sense for them to be rewarded for not, doing the shameful thing of the devil of tanking in the NBA. No. That's what I was approaching it from. We've been bad for so long that we sometimes just look for. I sometimes will be just minding my own business and think, can I find some sort of logic that would make it make sense for Wemby to come to the Rockets so I can feel better about the situation of the team? So sometimes that happens. But I wanted to touch on a lot of people were mad at what Tilman said, just from not even from a now we're not going to get Wemby sent, but I think it's good that he's engaged with the team, that he still roots for the team,
right,
while not impacting the strategy. And I think it will be really important going into next offseason to not make bold moves that are rash just for the sake of winning some more games. If we don't get a top 2 pick, being calculated and going after guys that fit into many types of team building, like Cam Johnson, for example, that would be a big. I would rather do that. I do maybe what the Knicks did in delaying the cap space and signing a bunch of guys that can come in and play a role that are on 1+1 deals, for example, or 2+1 deals that are very easily movable. But that can bring in some experience around your current young guys. I would rather do that than just go out and max D'Angelo Russell, for example, to come play point guard. Because I just don't think that's the correct way to go. It would be a very Kristaps Porzingis type situation.
Right.
But I do think it.
Go ahead.
I do think that as you said, it's also important that he is invested still, because next offseason is going to demand a lot out of Tilman financially, I think. Because the Rockets aren't in a really good position, and they'll be a much better situation, or they'll have a lot more leverage and pull in the head coaching market this offseason, which has a lot of good candidates. I'll get into it. They will have a lot of pull if they get Victor Wembanyama or Scoot. I do think that this young core looks a lot better if you add one of those two onto it. But I do think that, considering that Rockets have been the worst team in the league for 3 seasons, it will take, and I think it will be really important for in order to bring in a top tier head coach. Which for me, the best of the best for me is Quinn Snyder going. If I could pick any name, I've talked to some Jazz fans about it. He's not only a good coach on the floor, he's also a good guy at holding guys accountable. I know the situation in Utah ended up blowing up because of personalities, but early on in his tenure in Utah, there's a lot of Jazz fans write about his ability to just yell at players, and players sometimes would have a terrible first half and come back like a completely different team in the second half. Just to say that it will be really important for Tilman Fertitta to just open up the checkbook when it comes to a head coach. Yeah. There's basically no scenario where the Rockets are going to pay tax next season. It's just from a cap standpoint, it would be really hard to pull off. But getting a top head coach, especially if it is Quinn Snyder, will not only take paying Quinn Snyder very handsomely, because the dude didn't coach last year, so he's clearly trying to pick a spot. And if you want him to pick the Rockets, you're going to have to pay him well. You're also going to have to pay for a fairly expensive assistant coaching staff behind the head coach, because these guys are going to want to bring in their own structure around them, and they'll try to look out for the guys that they're bringing in with them. And I could see how much you pay the assistants be one of the draws that can give you an edge when going after one of these head coaches.
Reportedly, that's what blew up the Kenny Atkinson deal with Charlotte last summer, when he went there but then decided against it. There was a report that Charlotte wasn't willing to invest to the level that he wanted with assistants, and so he basically chose to stay with the Warriors and wait for the next opportunity, which could be a better one.
Yeah, so it's important that Tilman is still engaged enough and is still passionate enough about the team that he's feeling what the fans are feeling right now.
Right.
Because people are pissed. People are really mad and about the production of the team. And if Tilman's watching, I'm sure he's feeling those exact same things. I bet you he's desperate to make this team good again. But the fact that he's towing the line between not interfering too much but also being invested is important, because that's where you want your own to be. You want him to be desperate enough that you'll get him to spend, and and he'll be invested in the vision that you have, so he'll back it. But also not so invested that he doesn't trust the people that he's put there to do the jobs, namely Rafael Stone and the front office, that he'll step in and do stuff like the Russell Westbrook trade, where he basically reportedly pushed it through. He said it himself, pushed it through the
final 5%.
Yeah, the final 5%. So it was actually a relief for me that he is okay with the tanking, that he knows what's going on, that he's still invested. And it makes me more confident. And the fact that he was kind of jokingly about it makes me more confident that he won't interfere while still
Yeah.
being invested enough to go grab a really good head coach, because I think that's the biggest stuff we could say next offseason.
Yeah. And speaking of head coach, let's wrap up the episode by talking about the Rafael Stone interview that we've teased to a few times. Because honestly, that was my biggest takeaway when we look at that Brian T. Smith article. Well, I guess a good place to start. First off, kudos to Rafael Stone for doing the interview. That's something we've said in the past. I think a lot of the angst within the fan base could be calmed down if there was more of a, I guess, ongoing dialogue between the front office and the fan base, to where fans felt like they were in the loop on, how the front office feels about certain things, what's acceptable, what's not. I think a lot of things can take off in silence. Things can spiral out of control. So even if it's just something simple, just talking to a reporter for 10 minutes for a story or a talk radio interview, that can do a lot. He did do the press conference after the deadline, but that's sort of standard. If you have any trade of significance, a GM is going to have a media availability. What we want is more throughout the season, just occasional updates. That doesn't be a full-blown press conference. Just call into a radio show or do an interview with a columnist. And just that little bit of info, I think, can sort of calm the fears of fans who are clearly frustrated with all the losing. Hopefully, this is the start of that. And kudos to Rafael Stone for taking some hard questions from Brian T. Smith, because say what you will about Brian T. Smith. I know he's a bit of a polarizing figure on Houston sports Twitter, but I can tell you, as someone in the media, he asks tough questions. This is not like Rafael just went to, say, the team website and basically just got lobbed some softballs. No, he was asked legitimate questions. And so kudos to Rafael and the Rockets for making themselves available. I think this is the kind of thing that, even if it's little, even if it seems simple, it can do a lot in terms of just keeping the fan base bought in on what the vision is, and to keep things from spiraling out of control the way they have at various points, especially the last couple of months, what we've seen on Rockets Twitter and some of the discussions. So kudos to Rafael for doing the interview. As far as what he said, I think, he's never going to use the word tanking, but he went into it as in depth as I've ever seen him in terms of specifying the importance of the years in which they control their own draft capital, which is 2022 and 2023. So read between the lines on that one. And he says, and he's right, they have been forward about what the plan is. It is not hard to understand. A lot of times when people say, I don't know what the plan is, at least in the macro, they just want a punching bag. The Rockets have been clear going into this stretch, really starting when they traded James Harden in 2021, what is going to be coming up over these next couple of years. And of course, when I say a couple of years, talking about the 2021 through 2023 timetable, it has not been a secret. So at least on a macro level, those things are overblown. The plan has been out there, and he spelled it out even more in this interview. If you don't know what the plan is in terms of the big picture, maximizing draft capital, and then the types of veterans they need, acquiring that with your salary cap room this summer, you're just not paying attention. It's pretty clear what they are trying to do, and of course, giving lots of playing time to young players you're trying to develop, and inherently that makes you more likely to maximize your draft capital as well, because young players aren't likely to impact winning to a high degree. So all these things work hand in hand, and if you didn't know this before Rafael Stone's interview, you just haven't been paying attention. But regardless, he explicitly spelled it out. Good for him. As far as the interview itself, the biggest takeaway I had is that, barring something absolutely crazy, Stephen Silas is going to finish the year as the head coach, because Brian T. Smith did ask him about the micro, and that's where you can draw questions. The macro, in terms of, and we talked about this when we graded Rafael Stone, it's pretty clear what the plan is, and it absolutely still can work in terms of getting the assets, both veterans and prospects, to try and turn you into a contender a few years from now. From the macro, it's going well. Where the questions are is in terms of the day-to-day, the player development, the roster management, the little things. That's where there are some fair questions. And going into the year, he talked about Rafael Stone, that is wanting the Rockets to be a very hard team to play, that they're the type of young team that I suppose plays the way, ironically, Oklahoma City does, the team that's blasted them twice this month already, to where they just have relentless energy and are a nightmare for these more veteran type teams to play. Clearly, that's not what's going on. And Brian T. Smith asked him directly, and Rafael's response, to a certain extent, it's hard to judge because it's not over. We're at the 2/3 mark or something. And especially with a young team, the last games, 24 that is, you don't blow through those. In some ways, they can be the most important. Now, later in the interview, he does acknowledge that things aren't going great. He says part of the execution is the people we have on our roster need to get better. Yes, that's referring to a lack of player development. But I guess number one, I don't think you do this interview if you're on the verge of making a coaching change. No, you would wait until you actually make the change. And secondly, if you were going to make the change, it would be done by now. This is the perfect time, and that you could have done it after the second OKC annihilation, and you would have had over a week for the new coach to sort of implement his schemes, get ready for this final 24 game stretch. It would also be a week for the players to get used to the change mentally and perhaps accept it. The fact that it hasn't happened by now, this is the window. You have every reason to do it. The lack of player development, the 7 straight losses. Of course, you did have the couple of heartbreakers, the Jimmy Butler lob in Miami and the bad call that sent De'Aaron Fox to the line to win that game. But a lot of those 7 straight losses going into the break were completely uncompetitive, like the 2 OKC games. You had every opportunity to get rid of Steven Silas. And one of the reasons it's hard to make an in-season coaching change is, it's a lot to ask players to adjust to on the fly. Well, now you have almost 10 days without basketball, and we're right in the middle of that, and they still haven't done it. So between that and the fact that Rafael Stone is saying directly, we're only 2/3 of the way through, let's see what happens over the final third. To me, that suggests that they're going to play this thing out and then go into the coaching market in the offseason. And of course, this is the final fully guaranteed year financially of Steven Silas's contract. And there's pros and cons to it. We've talked about it before, but the reality is that Rafael Stone is sort of putting his line in the sand that he doesn't think the harm that's being done in terms of, I suppose, a lack of player development or any of the other day-to-day issues that we've cited this season. I guess number one, he doesn't think it's anything that's irreversible. And secondly, it's not anything that is so severe that it's worth the potential downside of letting Steven Silas go now. Because if you let Silas go now, say what you will about Silas as a coach, but you do open yourself up organizationally to a lot of criticism in terms of, what the reaction is going to be nationally. It would be like the Texans firing Lovie Smith on steroids in terms of people saying, oh, Silas was set up to fail. It wasn't fair. And who knows if Steven Silas and his agent might want to leak some dirty laundry about the organization. There are some negative PR consequences if it looks like you're sort of hanging Steven out to dry. And that may not be good entering a summer that you have $60 million in cap space and want to be aggressive and get players to take a chance on your organization, which has been bad for 3 years running. So I think from their perspective, it's just much easier from a PR standpoint to make a clean break after the season to say, you know what, we're going to take this in a different direction. The contract is up. We think we need a different voice for where we are now, as opposed to if you do something during the year, it looks like you are holding him individually accountable. And then there's all sorts of negative, potentially at least, PR consequences that can come from that in terms of how your organization looks externally. And while we can say that that shouldn't matter, the reality is perception is a big part of the game when it comes to a year in which you hope to be very active in free agency. And Rafael spells it out in the interview that he plans on signing veterans in free agency, those types of guys to fill the roles that a lot of us have been talking about that this team needs filling this season, that they need these types of veterans that can help the young guys develop. So for me, you never say never. If they lose 20 plus games in a row, maybe that's enough. But I just think that if we're this deep into the year and the All-Star break passes without a coaching change, I struggle to see it happening the rest of the way. My gut tells me that they just don't view the upside as enough to be worth the downside, at least the downside risk of all the other things that could accompany, hanging Steven out to dry. And hopefully Rafael's right. Time will tell. I'm sure the Fertittas will be watching as to, whether his assessment is correct, because again, some of it's just sort of banking on this idea that, hey, even if there is some damage with player development, and he hints at that, again, part of the execution is people we have on a roster need to get better. The idea is that it's not anything irreversible, that if you bring in the right coach in the offseason, you bring in the right veterans, that it's something that can be much improved starting next season. And again, it's a tough call. You're balancing a lot of factors, but to me, it just looks like that they've decided organizationally that whatever the upside is of giving the team to an interim John Lucas, Lionel Hollins, someone like that just isn't worth the potential downside from a perception standpoint. So to me, it seemed pretty clear once we got through Thursday and Friday that there wasn't, I guess, a coaching change announcement, that there wasn't going to be one this season. But now with Stone giving this sort of comprehensive interview, to me, that interview just does not read like a guy who's seriously thinking about a coaching change or that being on the horizon before the end of the year. So that was probably my biggest takeaway. I think the stuff he said in the macro was fairly obvious. He just said it on the record. In terms of the short term, to me, it makes it pretty clear that Steven's going to finish the year for better or for worse. I know you may not love that, Paolo, but at this point, I think it is what it is. They're going to finish up the year pretty much with what they have and then take a hard look in the offseason.
Yeah, I'm already numb to it. It's fine. It's okay. I think I've said it before. I would have fired Steven Salas, but I mean, the longer you go, the least the reward is for firing him. So it makes less sense as you go to the end of the season. I just still think that they'll get some backlash for not bringing him back, just because it's the Rockets. But
it'll be less.
It will be less, substantially less.
But
people hate the Rockets.
Yeah. One quick point that I want to throw in. I think, your point is astute as far as the juice just isn't worth the squeeze the later you go into a season. When it might have actually been worth it was December, when things really started going south, the second half of that homestand, when they just had all these uncompetitive losses to bad teams in a row, the Blazers, the Spurs, and then especially that Orlando game that they choked away because of the zone. I mean, that was the stretch in which it might have made sense. But then I think that would have been especially delicate from a PR perspective, because that was right after Steven's dad had passed. And just imagine what the PR would have been if you tried to let him go then, 10 days after his dad, renowned NBA coach Paul Silas, that's respected just unilaterally across the entire league. The timing just wasn't right. And now it just may be too late for it to be worth it.
Yeah. And so besides that, as I was saying, I do think that they'll still face some backlash for not bringing him back. Just the I wonder if the news will come out as he was fired because his last year, or if he has a non-guaranteed year for next year, wasn't picked up. I wonder how the report will be framed, because I know some people say he was fired, some people say he'll just, because of the contract structure, it'll be funny how they frame it, but. I wanted to focus on something else on an interview, and a lot of people on Twitter were on the Rocket sphere were talking about it. The fact that he said that it's all going according to plan. I think there's some nuance to it, and I think when you're listening to Rafael Stone talk, you've got to realize that he's always trying to say as little as he possibly can. And I think the plan at the macro level was, if you had to describe the plan in one sentence, it would be, we'll be bad for 3 years, and then we'll use the cap space and the fact that we don't owe draft picks to the Thunder, that we start owing draft picks to the Thunder again. We'll use that as our fuse to try and make winning moves, because there's no upside to being bad. I think that's the general gist of what the plan was. That's what was basically explained at the beginning of the rebuild, or not at the beginning, but right after the draft, because there was some time there where they were trying to be mediocre for that season, since it was only 50% shot that we kept Jalen Green. But I will say that it's been pretty obvious that from a development standpoint, it hasn't been great. Players have taken steps back. Coaching's god-awful. How much of it will linger into next season, next couple of seasons, when it comes to bad habits and breaking them, or even just building good habits, we don't know yet. And we'll be able to have a better grasp of that by even the middle point of next season. That being said, I do think he didn't completely dodge the developmental standpoint, and I would like to read the quote that basically where he talks about the development. It's also important to know that he can't just come out and say, "Oh, everything's going to plan," but our players just shit, and they're not, and they're not like progressing at the pace that we would have hoped, because that's just burning the players, and you don't want to do that. You're the GM. You've gone through so much trouble to preserve player and agent relationships throughout the rebuild. You're not going to just burn the players that are already on your team. Just
Right.
doesn't make any sense. It's already hard enough for them to play basketball. They didn't gotta add another layer on top. But the one I was going to mention that I think is referencing the development is right at the end of the interview. He mentions part of the execution is the people we have on our roster need to get better. We need to bring in people who are already good. They need to complement one another, and we just need to grow as an organization, Stone said. I'm cognizant that the work is very, very far from being done, and none of us feel like it's done. But in terms of alignment and belief in what we're doing, I feel very strongly that we're all on the same page. This is basically him saying, hey, it does not look pretty, but at the macro level, this was always the plan. And the better you look, while we can be nitpicky, and we've been nitpicky the entire season, that you can be better while still being bad.
Right.
From a macro standpoint, I think that they would take this outcome versus what the Orlando Magic has going right now, or what Toronto has going right now, where they're clearly not good enough to get to the play-in, but or what Indiana has going on right now, where you're clearly not good enough to get to the play-in, but you subtracted 5 or 6 or 7% from your odds at getting Victor or Scoot. And it might come draft lottery time might come, and one of those teams might get Wemby. That's totally reasonable. But you've got to play the odds, and
Yep.
I think it's, if you can get to the play-in, I'll take the lottery chance decrease from not that makes it all the more unlikely to get Wemby or Scoot. If you're going to try and get to the play-in and fall well short, and you're just, you're still a terrible team, you're just a slightly less terrible team, then it's just like there's not much upside. And that's why I say that I think, what are you really gaining? I don't think that the extra 10 wins the Magic have on Houston right now in 2 years will be what's talked about as the difference between the two teams. That being said, I do think that some acknowledgement has to be made that it's not gone 100% according to plan. And I think Rafael Stone acknowledges that in that last quote, that it's not as pretty as we maybe would have liked, but it's still along the same lines as what we had predicted. And as he says, it's a little too soon to judge. And I mean, that's an evergreen comment for him because he's a GM. The more time he can buy, the better. But I do agree that it doesn't look pretty now, but it doesn't take much for it to look insanely good, let alone just better. I wanted to bring up before I hand it off to you, I wanted to bring up a tweet that I had, I think 2 days ago, or it was actually yesterday. That the days are going by slowly. There is a world, and I had a little checklist of things that could happen this offseason. And it was Harden signing with Houston, Jabari learning how to shoot threes again, the Rockets drafting Wemby, Tilman opening up the checkbook for a good coach, for me ideally to Quinn Snyder, and the Rockets spending whatever is left of the cap space from Harden on a guy like Naz Reid, who I think is very underrated, and I would love for them to pursue because he's young. He is a shot blocking center who can set good screens but can also shoot. And from there on, and if we look in that team, you're now looking at a team that has a starting lineup of James Harden, Jalen Green, call it either Jabari Smith and Tari Eason as the forwards, or Jabari Smith and Wembanyama as the forwards and Sengun as the center. You could then, if you have so many ball handlers, you could try straight Sengun for one of the 3D wings that are likely available. Either one of the best ones on the market, obviously, like Mikal Bridges or Anunoby. And now all of a sudden you're looking at a team like James Harden, Jalen Green, Mikal Bridges, Jabari Smith Jr., and Victor Wembanyama, who has a lot of versatility, a lot of defense, a lot of rim protection, has a clear game plan in the pick and roll between Wemby and Harden, and Wemby can be used in a lot of the same ways Embiid can as a post big, as well as, the ability that Embiid has to shoot and get downhill. And then you still have an insane amount of talent behind it. You have a 6-man in KPJ, you have an extra excellent 3D wing off the bench, which is what I think the reason will become. You still have extra assets that you can try to consolidate into something to upgrade one of these positions in Christopher Taita, Usman Garuba, Jay Tate, KJ Martin. this sounds like a pipe dream, right? But if we go one, and this is like the top of the top. I think this is a playoff team. This is the top of the outcomes, right? But if you go and you look at it individually, Harden signing in Houston. So let's just judge each of these bullet points one by how likely or unlikely they are.
Okay.
Harden signing in Houston is not that unlikely. And if you ask people in Philadelphia themselves, they don't think Harden is staying. But even if we think that Harden is open to stay in Philadelphia, which I think he'll be, if we're not the favorites to landing Harden this offseason, we're clearly the second biggest candidate to land Harden. So it's not that unlikely you're one of the top two teams at landing Harden. It's not that big of a stretch. Jabari learning to shoot threes again, and he's supposed to know how to do it now. You've got to assume that Jabari Smith Jr. will be able to shoot threes, if not next season, at some point. Because if you don't, then this is just going way too wrong, and you might as well. If Jabari Smith can't learn how to shoot threes, you might as well either move on from him or continue rebuilding for a couple more years, because you're not even. It's like when people say Jalen Green and Jabari Smith right now aren't floor spacers. Man, that doesn't matter, because this team's not going anywhere unless they are, and unless you're suggesting that we gave up on them or that we continue rebuilding. We've got to build a team going into it expecting them to be floor spacers. Regardless, I think Jabari Smith shooting 37% from three next season is not that big of a stretch. I don't think it's a stretch at all.
It's really not. And, I want to clarify earlier, too, when we were criticizing Jabari, look, we were just saying it within the context of it's silly to blame everything on the guards for him not shooting well. At the same time, there's no reason to panic over him not shooting well at 19 years old, the youngest guy in his draft class, and of course adjusting to a way longer three-point line. No, that's completely normal. There's lots of good shooters who have not shot well their rookie years in the NBA. It's not that unprecedented, that especially, and there's a good reason for it in his case. He seems to especially be struggling with the greater length of the NBA line. Yeah, there's ample reason to think that he can be a lot better next year.
Yeah, just look at two guys with the same build, although they take different types of threes, but the same build body-wise. KD shot 28%, and Brandon Ingram did the same. And nowadays they're both great shooters with length. So first bullet point, Harden signing in Houston, we're a top two team bidding for Harden. We're one of the two favorites, if not the favorite. Jabari learning how to shoot threes, I would assume that that's just going to happen, because then we're doomed if it doesn't. So I think that's very likely. The Rockets drafting Wemby. This is the most unlikely one, but it depends on how you look at it. It is unlikely. It's only 14% chance, but it's there's nobody out there with a bigger chance of getting Wemby than we are.
Agreed.
So it's just as unlikely for us as for any other team, and most other teams are even more unlikely to get Wemby. So you are basically one of the three favorites to get Wemby going into it. And then Tilman opening up the checkbook for a coach like Quinn Snyder. I mean, it depends. I'm not in the front office. I don't know how Tilman's feeling. I don't know what his budget is for the head coach. But you've got to think that he's desperate for this team to be good. And so I think this is the more doubtful one. But if we don't get Quinn Snyder, if we get Udoka or Kenny Atkinson or someone like that, it depends on how many coaching vacancies there are going to be. But I would think that Houston is a pretty good contender for the next good head coach, especially with another top pick coming in. Then the last one, signing Naz Reid. I mean, he didn't agree to an extension with the Timberwolves because he wanted $10 million a year, reportedly. And the Timberwolves just don't. And it's not that they don't think he's worth it. It's that they have Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, and paying $10 million a year for a center that's going to play 16 minutes a game tops just doesn't make much sense. And I think he has a talent to play more. So I don't think throwing just not even the 10. If you want to go above the MLE, so you outbid every other contender, just give him 12 to 13 million a year, and you've got a really, I mean, I think an above average backup or second option at center. So Harden signing Houston, you're top two contender at that. Jabari learning how to shoot threes, I just assume that's going to happen. There's not one team in the league with a higher chance of getting Wemby than the Rockets have. These, it's kind of like when you're making a bet. I think in America you'll call it a parlay, and you're betting on all the favorites. It's still unlikely. It's somewhat unlikely that all the favorites win, but you're picking a bunch of not likely, but as likely as for you as they are for everybody else outcomes. And so
Yep.
while it is a pipe dream, it's not as much of a pipe dream as it looks on paper when you combine all of the moves.
Love the optimism. So guess what? Let's break it right there. I think there's been so much pessimism lately about this team, and for good reason. The losing, it's brutal. These games are not fun to watch. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy the positivity from this show. And of course, we'll be back in a few days, trying to round up an interview for y'all to perhaps keep this theme going before the games start back up next weekend, because that may bum us out a little bit. Anyway, for today, this is where we will break. For Paolo, I'm Ben. If you want more content before our next episode, Twitter is the best place to get it. I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA. Also, go to the Logger Line on Twitter. That's where you can find our link tree. It has basically information on where you can find us at Apple, Google, Spotify, all the major distributors. But it also has links to Carback Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, all of our friends, sponsors, partners of this program. You can find their content along with, of course, the distribution partners for where you can listen to this podcast each and every week. With that, we will adjourn. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode from the Logger Line.